Welcome beyond the Reiki Gateway. I'm your host, Andrea Kennedy. Like countless others, Reiki found me when I wasn't even looking, and then it ignited a whole new world of questions. This podcast explores topics of interest for the spiritually curious. Join me for discussions and special guests on subjects such as past lives, crystal healing, spiritual awakening, ascension, energy healing, and more, all to assist and inspire you along your unique soul's journey. This episode is sponsored by Mainstream Reiki, offering live and online Reiki classes and a membership community to help Reiki practitioners succeed and grow in their practice. Find out more at mainstreamreiki.com. Welcome. I'm your host, Andrea Kennedy, and I have with me Dave Markowitz, who is a two-time best-selling author, intuitive healing facilitator, and guide for empaths, sensitives, and intuitives. You may recognize him as a faculty member of the Shift Network or from his endorsements from fellow authors, healers, and teachers, including Lee Harris, Shirley MacLaine, Lynn Andrews, Danyan and Catherine Brinkley, and many more. Dave is known as the empath guy and has helped thousands of empaths and highly sensitive people realize tangible healing results. Of course, you probably also know Dave from being on Beyond the Reiki Gateway with me twice before. And when I heard about his upcoming book called Healing the Original Wound, I had to reach out again. Dave, I'm so thrilled that you're here. This is a topic that really got me curious, and I couldn't wait to talk to you about it. So welcome back.
It's so great to be here. It's great to see you, as always.
Thank you. So the original wound, I think even the title is enough to get people to sort of take a double take and be like, what is that about? What is it? What is the book really about? What are you referring to about the original wound?
Well, one of the interesting things about that title also is if you use the first letter of original and wound, it's ow. So healing the ow is kind of I don't know if it's a subtitle or there's, everything's being finalized now. So yeah, we all have an ow. We have a lot of ouches too, but I couldn't really find a good, acronym for that. We have lots of ows and lots of wounding that really, in my understanding, are the causative layers of so much that we deal with and so much of the healing that we do that doesn't seem to work. It can all point back to the original wound. And it's actually a series of wounds. So it's healing the original wounds, plural. And what I was showing in my meditations and what I've been working with in the last probably year or two with lots and lots of clients with this is that there are 4 original wounds. I think there might be a lot more, but there are 4 sort of labels that we can use to describe the original wounds and the timing around that. And of course, they happen in our most formative years and even days. And, each one creates a kind of void, a kind of a calling. And we then search for these callings. We try to fill the void later in life. Typically, though, we've tried to fill it with things that don't work, or they work temporarily. And, the more I kept seeing this and working with it, it just made so much sense. And, it's been quite a journey. So, yeah.
So you've probably drawn on your thousands of sessions for this, right? I mean,
totally.
I find that fascinating. And you mentioned there are 4 wounds. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. And it's funny that you mentioned, I'd forgotten about it, but the sessions kind of inform what ends up being in the books. The first book I wrote called Self-Care for the Self-Aware was based around my own, sort of realization that I was an empath, also how much I fought it, but also the whole journey about once I realized that was true, that my whole practice really shifted. I started getting a lot of people that would come to me. Like, normally I was doing more traditional medical intuitive work. I know that sounds like an oxymoron, but I know you know what I mean. Where
Yes.
people would come to me, let's just say with a back pain, and then I would be able to intuit, okay, this is anger at your dad. And then once I understood the empathic connections, I was able to see a bigger picture. And while that might be true, there's also like your dad's anger that you might be holding, your mom's grief. So all of these things really informed the sessions, these awareness and all the success I was having in those sessions with people that were really stuck in some other modalities that weren't getting the results. So I was able to kind of, the book actually wrote itself like really quickly because I had all that experience already. And this one is kind of similar. Of course, the editing process and all that kind of thing makes it much longer. But I remember starting to write it and it just wasn't really flowing. And I was sort of fighting it a little bit. And then I have to realize, wait a minute, I'm the guy who's teaching to stop fighting life, right? And I just let it kind of float and just do a little bit here and there, a little bit here and there. And then at one point, it just started boom, 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 boom. And in about like 3 weeks, it was practically done. And my wife said, you do this all the time. You complain for like a year, it's not flowing. And then you finally sit down and you get it going. The next thing you know, you have a couple hundred pages. Again, of course, the editing and all that kind of thing. So, yeah, all the work is informing what's in the book. So it's based on experience. And I think that's important to note. It's coming from a place of practicing and, really taking on the wisdom in the original wounds. And now everyone I know is saying, well, what are the original wounds already? So I hope it's enough of a setup for you.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it totally is. And, it's funny because your process with that, I love that you shared that because I know I can relate to that. I mean, I'm not writing books over here, at least not yet, but um, I see myself do that with my own projects. I bet a lot of our listeners can relate to that too. And wow, so that's it. I think it's comforting, at least for me, to know that you do that same kind of thing that I
Yeah,
do. But
not alone.
oh, yeah. It's a struggle, right? And I've heard you talk about resistance before. And, you said something, it must have been on one of the previous shows or something. I saw you, I don't know where it was, but you were talking about, you need to do writing or something like that, do your work. And it's like, well, I think I need a glass of water. I, I'm a little hungry. I think I'll go get something from the kitchen, and it's, every time I do that, I think of you because I'm like, yeah, it's that resistance, I'm just coming up with all of these little things to keep me from doing it. But
Absolutely.
yeah.
That's the great clue for me. If I open the refrigerator more than a couple times in just a few minutes, I pretty much know I'm resisting something. So kind of just feel in, say, okay, what am I actually not willing to feel?
Mm,
And just sitting with that question typically brings me to the answer. And even sometimes just general irritability throughout the day here and there. When I notice that, I say, okay, what's causing that? It's part of us, sure, and I don't want to judge it. That only makes it worse. But to really sit in the inquiry and say, what am I irritable about? And more than 9 times out of 10, I'm holding some kind of emotion back. And then I ideally go have that emotion. Right? We spoke before we started recording about the value of crying, and grief is such a healer, and it's so underrated and judged and misunderstood. And I always feel better after I cry, right? That phrase, I had a good cry, right? Or that phrase,
yes.
good grief, right? It's all like in our lexicon already, but because we were taught to judge it, we typically don't use it. But to me, it's the emotional immune system, if you will. It helps us heal. So when things are out of sorts, I go in and I just cry. And sometimes it's about very clearly about, something that has happened. Sometimes it's not that clear. And the mind says, well, what is it? What is it? But I don't need to know. I just need to experience the feeling. The mind is always trying to say, if I know what it is, I can stop this uncomfortable feeling. And that doesn't really help.
Yeah, that is such a profound thing that you just said because when the mind can label it, then it really, it just changes everything, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Oh.
And the need to label it can really get in the way of really healing. Where I say, feel first. If you need to know what it's about, it'll come to you. And if you don't need, you just have the experience. And, more than 9 times out of 10, I feel better afterwards.
Oh, yeah.
Probably every
It
time, actually.
Yeah, it's like trusting. Yeah, and
Yes.
I think crying is such a release. It's
Yeah.
so good, so healthy for us.
Yeah.
Um, all right. So the wounds, can we talk about the wounds now?
Not yet. I'm just kidding.
Oh, okay. I'd love
Okay.
to know what they are.
Okay. So I think we'll all relate to these. And I do believe they're universal. Obviously, not having worked with everyone on the planet, I can't say that be 100%, but it seems to be at least close to universal. And the wounds are various forms of abandonment and separation. And it creates situations and discomfort in our body that we often take with us, right? So sometimes things happen and put us in a place of fear. And what fear does, it heightens the nervous system. And if that fear isn't really worked with directly, we end up having a hyperactive nervous system. And it could be 30, 50 years later. And we wonder, why am I so anxious, right? And sometimes it can be traced back to original fears. So, other things, original grief, and any kind of loss and all the emotions that go along with those losses are really what needs to be healed. So in order of their appearance, I'll say the first original wound is the physical separation from your mother. I think I can be pretty sure and say that is a universal thing. Okay.
I think you're right. Yes.
Okay, cool. Just making sure. So it seems, obviously it's a painful situation. Not being a mom, I can assume, um, but also for the baby. I mean, babies typically come out crying or about to cry. And what is really happening there? What I was shown was as soon as the umbilical cord is cut, we lose our physical connection to our mom. And certainly if we're put down, like in a cradle or something like that. I mean, personally, I was actually put in one of those incubators for about the first 2 weeks of my life. I couldn't hold food down. I only found out about this in my late 40s, and it really explained, why do I have this abandonment wound, this separation anxiety? And it
Mm.
shows up in different ways, in different relationships, right? But it makes letting go very difficult, right? So if we backtrack for a moment, at least my understanding is that as a soul, we're connected to spirit, and we're in this sort of, I call it soup, right? Energetic soup. And we're all just kind of floating around and doing our healing work or whatever we're doing, right? I don't remember it, so I can't say 100%. But I think at some point we get this message that says, okay, now it's time to go incarnate into a physical body. So we're going from this oneness in this energetic soup into some sense of a physical oneness in utero. And depending on a number of things, of course, typically it's a reasonably okay situation. Now, of course, if mom is going through a lot, we're going to feel that as well. But typically we feel pretty safe. Again, on occasion, we might not feel wanted. Kids can feel that, of course, but at least the physical safety is there. And then as soon as that umbilical cord is cut, that creates that separation, and that creates a longing for a physical reconnection. So one of the reasons that I think all love cuddling, romance, etc., even just holding hands, it's really appeasing that physical separation. And think about how painful that must be, right? We're in utero for 9 months, la la la, everything's pretty groovy, getting my needs are being met, right? And all of a sudden you hear this and maybe even feel this snip, and it's like, whoa, what happened? Right? And then if we're not being held the first few weeks of life, we have a abandonment, and that shows up later on in our need for relationships. I'm not saying relationships are bad, of course. They can be wonderful, they can be challenging, but that's just part of the gig, of course, as well. But that need to physically reconnect is kindled really, really early on, probably in the first few minutes of life. And that creates a pretty intense wound. We go from a oneness to an individuate and begin the individuation process. And what I was shown was a lot of these wounds are continuations of that individuation process. So I think of it like an arc. Like we start out feeling very connected, we individuate, and then we spend our lives trying to attain oneness once again. And what I was shown in the meditations was this is the purpose. I know it sounds a little grandiose, and part of me doesn't even want to say it. Let's just, be authentic with what I'm feeling, but it is what I understand to be true, that we have this arc, and that's like the mission of life, is to reconnect with all the things that we were disconnected from. And because we learn through duality, contrast, and often through pain, it actually makes sense that we're going to have painful experiences early on in life. And this initial separation is certainly one of them. And that when we know this and really understand that our longing for a physical connection is innate, everyone has it. It's nothing to be ashamed of, but something to actually embrace and to work with and to really honor the process of reconnecting through one or more partners, with a dog, like physical connection, right? It doesn't matter where it's coming from, but that need is created really early on. And if it hasn't been healed, which I think is true, that it hasn't been healed for most of us, we often go into even unhealthy relationships just because it's better than being alone. And it can be
Oh,
subconscious, right? There's no blame here. I was certainly in a number of unhealthy relationships and I didn't want to let go, right? All right. Who hasn't, right?
yeah.
Right? Raise your hand.
Yes.
2 hands.
Yes.
Right. And we stay in these unhealthy relationships and people on the outside are saying, what are you doing? And this person is, but on the inside, that pain is so deep that if you lose that person, that original wound of abandonment gets triggered and it hurts way worse than it normally would. Of course, if you had done the healing work around it.
Right. Part of me is still back in the delivery room,
Mm-hmm.
all that time ago when you were talking about the cutting of the umbilical cord, because I think, for me, I'm going even the few minutes before that. The baby is
Yeah.
inside the mother, breathing fluid,
Mm-hmm.
and has the physical sensation of connection, being kind of squeezed and held in the belly, in the uterus that entire time.
Yes.
And then through birth, it's air, it's space, and
Yeah.
it's breath, not the consistency of the fluid. So I would guess from the baby's perspective, they go from being held, there's no space. And then when they get born, it's all space. They have
Right.
to regulate their own temperature. It's just air out there.
Yeah.
It's like emptiness. Wow.
It's a
And
big
then with
void.
a void.
Yeah.
Yes. That's a
Yeah.
great word.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what you described might be considered like kind of the beginning of that initial separation, and the cord might be the sort of final cut,
Ooh, yeah.
pun
Yeah.
semi-intended.
That
Right.
just, it brings up emotion just when you said that. Oh my goodness.
That's how we know we're onto something, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just never thought about that, until now, talking with you about that. But wow, what a complete shift and experience for that little
Absolutely.
baby. Yeah.
Absolutely. And people
Mm.
sometimes wonder, why is a baby crying so much? Well, just think about what we just said. Crying is the body's way of healing loss. You just went through one of the biggest
Mm.
losses you're ever going to go through, right?
Yeah.
How could it not be painful, right? So ideally, we let the child have their sadness, but we also hold them, right? I mean, I think most of us know if you hold a child gently and lovingly, they'll typically stop crying, at least calm down somewhat. But putting a pacifier in, and that just teaches that it's not safe and not even welcome, that the grief is a bad thing, right? And it also sets up
Mhm.
for a lot of addictions later in life, like the hand to mouth addictions, which is
Right.
almost all addictions, right?
Yeah.
Smoking, drinking, etc.
Yeah.
And a lot of it can trace back to that, the binky, the pacifier, right? We pacify discomfort with oral satisfaction, and it
Yeah.
works temporarily. But in the long term, what you're really doing is repressing all that energy that's trying to come up and out and heal.
Yeah, but, babies will use their thumb, right?
Hmm.
I mean, they'll use their thumb if they don't have the pacifier, and I guess we started using pacifiers and all of that to get them to stop sucking their thumb, so
At
isn't
least
that
that's the baby
interesting?
choice, right? Because,
Mhm.
they're choosing to do that, but being
Right.
forced to stop crying by someone else who's uncomfortable with it, I don't think
Mm.
feels very supportive.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and the swaddling of the babies, wrapping them really tightly in the blankets.
That helps.
We
Yes.
Yeah, that's another thing, I guess, of um, helping them feel held,
Yeah,
more tightly. Oh.
definitely. And there are a lot of people who really benefit from very tight wrapped blankets. Um, even in the wild, like it's not really wild, but like in factory farming, which I am against. Okay, but when the animals are really upset, they have those walls that kind of trap them, and that actually calms them down,
Oh,
right?
right, or thunder shirts for dogs, or weighted blankets for
Exactly,
people.
weighted blankets. Yeah, I forgot the
Yeah,
phrase. Yeah. So I
yeah.
think a lot of times it's really bringing us back to the womb, right? It's
Yes.
a warm, enveloping feeling, and it's, I think, addressing this physical separation without even knowing it. We just know it feels good.
Yes. Wow.
Yeah,
Okay, so is that one wound? Is all of that
that's
just
just
one of
one.
these wounds? Oh my goodness.
Right.
That's enough, right? I
It's
mean,
a
that's a
lot.
lot.
It
Yeah.
is, absolutely. The next one is even more painful, I think, but we'll go
Uh-oh.
into that. Before we go there, I do want to point out what I think is true. I might have alluded to earlier that there is a rhyme and reason for what we're talking about here. And if we remember that arc of oneness to individuation back to oneness, a lot of this makes a lot more sense. And granted, it's painful,
Mhm.
but it's not wrong. I really think we're
Yeah.
designed to go through this arc. And of course, the
Yes.
experience is different for each person, and how we try to fill those voids that are being created. Um, but there's a method to the madness, as Shakespeare put it. Um, and one of the beautiful things about this work to me is it cuts down. I can't say it eliminates, but I think it cuts down and minimizes that ever-present question, why? And for me, at least, that's what happened, right? I stopped saying, why is this happening? Why is this happening? Why, right? When I got that answer, my level of inner contentment just, it gave me an invitation to no longer fight life. Fighting life doesn't work. I think we all know that, but I think we all do it anyway. And it's supported, people do it all the time, and, go, 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 fight, fight, fight. Whereas I think what we're really here to do is let go of the fight and surrender to source, to spirit, to something with more awareness than we typically have. So there's a reason for all of this. And yes, it's painful. And a lot of times we think, well, if the creator was all loving, he, she, it, they wouldn't create such a painful scenario. But clearly it has, right? This is what is, right? There's no should be's here. This is what is. And I think if we look through that lens, we can maybe accept these wounds a little bit more and work with them rather than fight them, which I think is what most of us typically do.
Yeah. Well, you made another really good point, and I'm curious as we move through these other wounds to see if this, I'm going to kind of keep score as we go through, because my suspicion is that they all fall into this applies to everyone type category.
I think so.
Everybody's born. Everybody has that. And there you can't not have that. And I think that is the feeling I have with that is it's integral. It's kind of like the laws of being human, you just
Nice.
cannot escape that. And I'm so um in agreement with you about the separation and then the journey to come back. Um, you know, you say it much better than I do, but I can't explain in words. It's just this feeling I have when you talk about that. Um, it's like I just know it's true. That's all I can say about that. But there's just a knowing there that, oh yeah, that is what it is.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm imagining that some of your listeners are also feeling that knowingness. And I also welcome someone not agreeing, right? It's really ridiculous for me to say I have all the answers because
Right.
how can that possibly be true? But I have the answers that have helped me a lot and
Mm-hmm.
all my clients as well. So there's something going on here. And when, as you know, when you feel something in your body, typically that's a sign, right? It's like
Mm-hmm.
something is being awakened here.
Yes. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Helps remind me I'm not crazy.
Oh no, not at all. If you are, then we are,
And we
and
all are.
that's okay.
Totally. Absolutely. I'd rather be crazy with you than not crazy.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like,
Yes.
but it's interesting, like even saying that as a joke, it's really just touching upon the truth of that inner dialogue sometimes that says, really, who are you? Who are you to speak this? Right. And of course, the question or the answer I typically hear in meditations is, well, why wouldn't it be you? Why wouldn't it be Andrea? Why wouldn't it be anybody and everybody? We all really ideally should feel safe enough to speak our truth. And if people agree, great. If they don't agree, can that be great also? I think so. So I don't like force this down anyone's throat. In fact, it's pretty rare, but I do sometimes get clients that really just start out by saying, I'm really skeptical. And I say, great,
Yeah.
me too. Now let's
Yeah.
work together. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
it's part of us. So I think we should honor it rather than beat ourselves up for
Yeah.
it.
I
Okay.
agree. I totally agree. Yeah. There's always more to learn. There's always new perspectives, new lenses to see through and feel through. And,
Yeah.
there's validity and uh, richness in all of that, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Everyone's path is legit and it should be honored. I'm with you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
All
Ready for
right.
the second
Yes.
abandonment? Okay. The second.
Hello, it's Andrea. And in addition to being your host here at the podcast, I'm the founder of Mainstream Reiki, where bringing Reiki further into the mainstream is my mission. I offer quality Reiki classes of all levels to students attending live from around the world. And I've built a membership community as well to help Reiki people connect with each other through discussions, events, and Reiki practice. So if you're considering learning Reiki or you already have, I invite you to visit mainstreamreiki.com to discover your next step in your Reiki journey. Thank you. And now back to the show.
The second is the perceived spiritual disconnection from source itself. And what I've found, understood to be true, I don't remember it actually happening, is when we're younger, even first few years typically, the ego begins to form. Right. So if we come out, we're all unconditional love. There's not a lot of ego there. I mean, who doesn't love being around a small baby? There's a lot of love there. Right. There's no ego saying I have to be right. Okay. But as time goes on, we start learning the conditioning of the planet and the ego begins to form. It also really begins to form to protect our tender hearts. So each time there's some kind of mistrust or we sense that a parent doesn't love us, we create these walls. So imagine for a moment, or your heart, actually, you want need to imagine. So you have your heart, and each time there's a wounding, a wall of protection gets formed around it and around it and around it and around it. So the ego begins to form in these walls of protection. And it's there to keep us safe, right? It's the part that says, you know what? Someone said something and it wasn't, they said they love me, but a minute later they were spanking me or they were withholding food or whatever it might be. The ego notices all of these things and says, okay, that happened once. I'm not going to let it happen again. And it kind of becomes this, child with their arms crossed kind of thing. No, right? But each time the ego begins to form, the perception of the disconnection from source begins to get more in play. So we have this, I don't want to call it an illusion, but we have this idea that we're no longer connected. And of course we are, but our perception of that connection diminishes. And what that does is creates a craving for the spiritual path. So whether we're 20 or 90, at some point we realize there's something missing and I need to connect with something on a more spiritual level. So people walk the Camino, people pray, people join religion, quit a religion, try a new religion. Of course, we're typically indoctrinated into the religions of our family. And those may or may not work for each individual. That creates even more resistance, right? And eventually creates this need. And it's this kind of thing that underneath that kind of feeds that sense of aloneness that we spoke about before with the physical separation. This is more of the spiritual disconnection, but with a reason. It's creating the void to then fill it in later on in life. That's when we have our first contact with angels or guides or source. It feels so good, right? Because it's filling that void. And we just want more and more and more of that. And eventually we realize one of the ways at least to get that is to start working with those protective layers and dismantling the ego, but not through logic, because if you try that, it's going to win. Not through anger and fear, because again, it thrives on that, but through love and compassion. That's what actually melts those walls of protection. Also doing the emotional work, having the sadness, having the anger, having the fear, allowing it to be there, and also being compassionate with those parts of ourselves. So we begin to reconnect with spirit. And some of us, maybe don't have as much of a disconnection, right? I know some people that are, remember when they were 9 years old, for example, and felt totally one with spirit. Wasn't the case for me. I didn't feel that till probably my 40s, give or take, right? So it was extra appreciated in my case, right? So again, we learned through duality and contrast. I had to learn the disconnection from spirit before I could learn to reconnect with it in a way that actually made sense to me. But you can see how that disconnection can create a perception that we're alone. It feeds into the fear, and we start seeing other people as separate as well, and believe, and you make judgments about others. If we really knew we were connected through that energy of source and really recognize that everyone is just on their path, it wouldn't be as much of an issue. But again, this creates the spiritual journey, if you want to call it that.
I think that goes into the category of it happens to all of us again, right? All
Yeah.
of us. But I sort of look across the landscape of my life and, our experience, right now. And this is where some people kind of get stuck. They have been separated from spirit, what you're talking about, but some people are not on a spiritual journey at all and don't seem to appear like they're interested in a spiritual journey.
Yeah.
So do some people just go through the first wound and then the second, and then there's no resolution for them, at least in this lifetime?
Sure.
Mm.
Yeah. If we look at souls on, soul paths, not all of these wounds are going to be addressed. And it's up to those that are aware of these things to be compassionate with those people just as much as we want to be compassionate. Is that hard? As much as we want to receive compassion from anyone else. Like everyone's just on their path. And even those that don't appear to be on a spiritual journey, I think if you really got to know them, you'd sense some kind of void on a deeper level. And they may not want to talk about it, but as empaths, sometimes we can feel it.
Mm.
So I think it might be there. It just might not be, like you said, you can go through a whole lifetime not even paying attention to it. And especially for people who grew up like during wartime, for example, they're in fight or flight, they're in survival mode. That becomes the state of being typically for the rest of their lives. Right? Remember that heightened nervous system kind of thing we spoke about.
Mhm.
And there's just no time, right? You can't process emotional trauma if you're in a war zone, for example, or even if it feels like you're in a war zone, which can be like a PTSD kind of thing. So yeah, I mean, great point. Thank you. And it's to that same point, like it's different for everyone, and yet I do think it's there.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, it's fascinating. The third one, are we ready for the third one?
Sure, why not?
Okay.
Okay. So the third one I call the emotional. So think about it. The first one is physical, the second one is spiritual, and the third one is emotional. So these are like the three main things that we focus on in our lives typically.
Mhm.
The third one is the emotional withdrawal by your family of origin. So let's go into that a little bit. So most children have a sense of unconditional love during the first few months of their lives, but typically, real life takes over. Parent goes back to work, kid gets put down. Even going to bed can be traumatic because they're not feeling supported, seen, heard, connected with, and that if that unconditional love isn't continued, it causes a yearning for a deeper emotional connection with other people. It just makes sense, right? You have this so back to that duality contrast. We have an emotional connection typically in the first few months, certainly the first few days, maybe weeks. Most people are in their hearts when they're around you as a child. And you, of course, as the child, are unconditional love manifest, right? So there's lots of love going around. But again, so-called real life kicks in, and that creates the emotional cravings. So this shows up later in life when you're in a relationship and it feels like something's missing, for example. And then we learn about things like being authentic with our feelings, vulnerability, right? Brene Brown talks about these things so beautifully. And, you know, even in a decent relationship, right, there can be a lack of vulnerability and authenticity with the actual feelings. We get caught up in, what are they going to think of me? I'm not safe to express my feelings. And a lot of this happens when we're younger. When we express our feelings, they're typically not supported as kids, right? So we learn to judge those feelings. And unfortunately, the more we repress feelings, the more pain and illness we're going to experience, right? Is a very direct comment. Um, Connections. The mind body are very connected, right? Even though a lot of want to separate those, we know through our work that what we think immediately, Deepak Chopra says, everything you think creates a chemical in your brain, that we're walking pharmacies, right? And you can create happy chemicals, you can create sad chemicals. But that's not to judge the experience because we don't really understand happy if we don't really have experience with sad. So back to that duality and contrast once again. So the yearning for deeper emotional connection is, I think, something that we all experience, but we might not even know it, right? Because, some generations just didn't really have the language for that. They just accepted the relationship as it is. This is what is, and we got to deal with it. I got to go to work and you got to raise the kids, you know, and
Yeah.
that's it, right? Um, you know, I feel like I'm just being guided to share this. I, like many of us, were raised with this idea that like big boys don't cry. It's not cool if you cry, all this kind of thing. And I remember one time right after a breakup, I was trying to hold it in because I was visiting my family of origin. And my dad saw me crying and he got really upset at my then ex girlfriend. Right. And I was like, and he said something like, oh, yeah, she made you cry. Like it was the worst thing ever.
Oh.
So I knew that if I didn't have that expression, I knew he probably wouldn't appreciate it. But to hear it even in adult life as a reminder of what I experienced as a child, that these parts of me were not welcome. And this is not like a victim, woe is me. I think we all can relate to this in some way, shape, or form. So that emotional connection is a big part of what we really want, especially with our mother. A lot of times, so many people I work with really want a deep emotional connection with their mother and just can't go there. Like we start to go there, and then mom says, "Okay, what's for dinner?" Or it just kind of cuts off. And I noticed this in my life a couple of times also, and I try to bring the conversation to a different level. As soon as emotional vulnerability got in, someone would tell a joke, distract in some way, shape, or form. Right. So I think it starts out really early on. It's hard to say, like, is it a month or a year? It could be, all the above, right? But it's continued, and then we have that void now, the emotional void that makes us want to really connect with people in a much deeper way. So if we're not at that place, it's because we learned it wasn't safe way back when to do so. So that's another original wound.
Yeah. I think this is really deep stuff, Dave, I gotta say. Yeah, and it's making me think back and probably the listeners too, about things they were told when they were children and, so I'm kind of replaying some things in my mind and all of that. And yeah, again, I think everybody can relate to this.
I hope so.
Yeah,
you
I
know,
really do. Yeah.
I
I
think
got
also my hope is that if there isn't an immediate connection, that we just kind of, let the seed stay within, and maybe it germinates at some point.
yeah.
Um, so wherever someone is, great. But clearly, from your expression and what you're saying and feeling, it sounds like this is resonating.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, totally. Yeah. I look forward to the book too, so that, seeing it on the page and
Yeah,
taking time with it to reflect and things like that. And um, yeah, I think that'll be really helpful. Yeah.
yeah. I'm hoping so.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So the fourth abandonment is kind of an end result of the first three. I call it an eventual abandonment of the self. So what happens is we learn conditional love as soon as the unconditional love, like you're perfect, you're a wonderful baby. And then when maybe you're 2 years old, someone says, do this, and you say, no. That's the ego beginning to form, right? And then becomes the conditional, or it becomes then conditional love is kind of brought to the surface. It also includes punishment and reward. We, as a parent, and unconsciously, of course, I'm not disrespecting parenting. Again, it is the norm. I think it's the system. It's made that way. So we definitely don't want to disrespect the people who are playing the game perfectly, right? Where if we do or don't do something, we receive or don't receive unconditional love anymore. It becomes conditional love, and it becomes transactional, right? You do this and then you get love, right? And I think we take that into our adult relationships a lot as well. It becomes transactional. Okay, I'll take out the garbage and you wash the car or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And it becomes like, okay, you do that. And it also gives birth to people pleasing, because we try and
Oh,
try
yeah.
and try to get that unconditional love. And, a lot of people listening, I imagine, have been involved with narcissists, because that's what empaths do. Again, not wrong or bad, but we learn from it ideally and move on in a healthy way. But we desperately need that unconditional love, and we will look everywhere for it, even if it comes at the expense of self. So we really squash our true self. And it's a very painful wound if you think about it, or even feel about it. We squash our sense of self to become what other people wanted us to be. That becomes our identity. And it can be really innocuous. For example, a kid plays piano and gets yay, right? Gets a lot of attention. Then there's the learning in that moment says, when I play piano, I get unconditional love. So I'm going to play piano more and more, right? Or whatever it
Mhm.
is, right? You can play it
Yeah.
for cuteness. It can be anything, but it turns into people pleasing. And at some point, we realize this is not really working for me anymore. So again, that arc, right? The oneness to individuation, figure out all the things that are not wrong and not broken, but and can be improved upon. So we do a work around needing that unconditional love from others, giving to ourselves, and it also ignites that self-creativity, that self-discovery mode in a different kind of way. Who am I if I haven't been who, if I'm not who I, let me try that again. Who am I if I'm no longer who I've been? And that's a really scary thing for a lot of people. And understandably, because that's what the identity is based upon, right? So it's like, and the ego will do anything to hang on to that. So we actually, again, stay in unhealthy relationships, for example, or just do things that sacrifice ourselves. And this is a big one for empaths and sensitives. We often sacrifice ourselves for the good of others. And eventually we realize, wait a minute, I matter. I belong. I am someone. My needs need to come first, not at the expense of others, but with, right? Kind of like the airplane, put the mask on first. We've all heard that. I've got 2 books on it prior to this, like basically saying like you really have to we have to take care of ourselves in order to then be there for others, right? So we create this false persona. Ego takes off with it, says, yes, I'm this. I am this person that does that. I am the caretaker. I am the mediator. I'm the healer. I'm the writer. I'm the, you name it, right? And then when that gets taken away. So in a way, it's almost like empty nest syndrome, right? That's a kind of very physical version of this.
Right.
But this duality within is actually creates a lot of tension in the body. So I'll just feel a need to specify I'm not a medical doctor. I do not diagnose. I do not claim to prescribe and cure, etc. But from an energetic standpoint, not being your truth self is very restrictive to your energy field. And everyone I've worked with, I can't say it's the only cause, but everyone I've worked with fibromyalgia, especially, have basically sacrificed their true self for the so-called good of everyone else, right? It's very insular in its energetics, really, again, that mind-body connection. But taking it even further, this is beyond mind. This is a conditioned belief system. Like, I don't matter. And, we're born as unconditional love. How could we not matter, right? We, of course, matter. Everything we do, think, and say matters. But we're taught typically that it doesn't. So that's that 4th abandonment. It's the abandonment of self in order to sometimes just survive, sometimes to get love, various things that we get from it. So then that creates the path for self-discovery, right? So it's pretty interesting, right? These wounds create very clear paths that we eventually, hopefully, partake in and say, wow, who am I? And sometimes we just don't know. And that can be really scary. And I actually love that when people say, I don't know who I'll be. And I say, awesome, celebrate that. And they always turn their head, so to speak. And I say, that means you can create anything you want. More importantly, I think, is you can surrender. What does spirit want for me? What is source looking to create through me? I know that when I'm in that place, that's, the book comes flying out. I'm totally present with my clients. I am being unconditional love in those moments. And that helps people feel safe, go to deeper places, go to deeper levels of healing, and then start creating a new version of self. And the sort of drawback of that is people that used to associate with sometimes don't recognize you anymore. And then the fear of abandonment comes up. The first one, the physical and emotional, or the third one, first and third, physical and emotional abandonment comes. I don't want to let go of that person because they've been part of my life for so long. Right. So you're nodding like you've done this. Okay.
Yeah. I can totally relate. We even talk about this, in the classes that I teach, the Reiki classes that I teach. And, our term for it is the culturally created self, making learning very young that, mom doesn't like it if I do that. So instead of expressing that way, I'm going to shove it down or, do a certain other behavior. And over time, it just gets automatic and we don't even realize we're doing it anymore. And then fast forward, you're in the middle of your life you don't like your job, you don't like your partner very much, et cetera, you're actually living a life that's created from getting by or people pleasing, like you're saying, or any number of things. And you wake up to a life that doesn't really reflect who you truly are.
Yeah,
It's made like a conglomeration or something of all of these reactions and fitting in and all of that. So, um, I wanted to get your take on something. You know how we talk about the terrible twos, around that age? Doesn't
yeah,
that fit right in with this? Because my thinking is it ties in because perhaps the 2-year-old is being forced to make that shift from unconditional to conditional love. But I'd love to
exactly.
hear whatever your thoughts are on that.
You just said it perfectly. I mean, how could that not be met with resistance? You're trying to change me. I might not
Mhm.
be conscious. Might be. I don't know. I don't remember being two. I can't say. But in some ways, it's saying, don't be who you really are.
Mhm.
And I think what also happens, to really expand upon that, so many teenagers, and I'm certainly one of them that had a very angry teenage experience. I think it was a long accumulation of exactly what you're talking about. School wanted me to be a certain way. Parents wanted me to be a certain way. Other people, and good intention, right? But you know, our light can be very scary for others sometimes, and we're
Mhm.
typically squashed by the people that are supposed to love us unconditionally, at least supposed to, in maybe in a folk story kind of way. But the reality is, it's very difficult unless a parent has done enough work to be so conscious of this. I think at some point a kid's going to rebel, and it looks different. I think every generation looks different with it. We dress differently than the one generation prior, but underneath it is this desire to no longer conform to what society wants from us. And if it continues, we create blockages within that can lead to difficult, even painful diagnoses, illness, pain, etc. But also, like you said, it keeps building. And you're 40, 50 years old, and then, whoa, who am I? So, as scary as that might be, again, knowing that it's part of the plan might decrease some of that. But I think it's also empowering to say, well, that means I can begin maybe now, do the deeper work and find out who I am. Or, like I said, allow that deeper version of me to emerge. And it may look very different than who we've been. So it can be really scary. And the challenge is, can we hold our own hands during that transition? Because the people that knew us, unless they're equally on a path or at least open to what you're going through, might be a little scared, right? So, like it's always, relationships, for example, in high school, like you really like someone, you kind of chase them and they run away, right? It's the same kind of thing, right? And if we pull back, they usually come, right? So it's this energetic dance that we're doing, but now we're doing it within ourselves, right? Do we chase who we want to be? And how much of that is actually also other people's ideas of what will make us happy or what we should be? Whereas doing the deeper work really gets us in touch with that inner column of light, that spiritual self. And then we become masters. Then we become really attuned, and we're just listening. What do I need to be in this moment? What is occurring in this moment? And how do I choose to consciously respond to it? To me, that's a master, because what we typically do is use old conditioning to say, okay, well, this person is here and I'm going to just, hi, how you doing? Hi, how the kids? Fine. Okay, great. Whereas the people I meet with, and especially if we work for a while, we don't really do a lot of that. Hi, how you doing? Hey, we start out like, how's your energy flow? Right? How's your emotional body? What are you feeling? Right? So it's an invitation. Again, it can be scary, but I think if we are held in a safe container and understand it, at least somewhat, that again, that's normal, we can begin to maybe co-create the next version of ourselves. I say co meaning ourselves and spirit, right? Because even, we might not know what that looks like. And I say celebrate that. Like, let yourself be informed. The more you can trust that process, typically the greater the results are going to be.
I have to say, that can be really scary for people.
Oh,
Super
yeah.
scary
Yeah.
because, whew, going through that process, having built a life, had a family, whatever that looks like. And I think part of it too, isn't it that they have to be willing to give themselves permission to vacate agreements and make new agreements in their life?
That's what's needed. Yeah.
And,
Right. I know.
well, I mean, I think typically a lot of us are on autopilot, so we just keep waking
Yeah.
up day after day in the same agreements, not even thinking really about that we have a choice. It's just
Yeah.
kind of a habit.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I
Hmm.
think the challenge is not to judge that habit, but to look at it as sort of a springboard and ask, maybe you enjoy that habit. Maybe you really love what is. And that's beautiful. And maybe you just need a little bit of a tweak. Maybe you just need a creative outlet. You need to start painting or something. It could be something very subtle. So everyone's path is different. And the invitation really is to open to that possibility, but not from a place of, oh my God, my last 40, 50 years have been a waste. Because on a soul
Oh,
level, absolutely not. They let you experience X so you can then experience Z. And now we know the why.
very clever. Very clever that was, Dave.
Thank you.
I love it. I love it. Wow. We're almost out of time. What I want to ask you though, given the conversation and how it's gone, what blanks do you want to fill in, or what else would you like to say about this that you feel um, needs to be said?
What I'm feeling guided to share is that it's a path that many of us are on, and that none of it is wrong or bad, and we're not broken. It's all sort of launching pads, diving boards, if you will, to a new, greater version of self. And any self criticism that we have obviously is not serving us. Criticizing others, judging others doesn't serve us either. We are who we are, we've been who we've been. And I think if we look at our past as something filled with regrets, unfinished, you know, relationships or anger, etc., left over, it can sort of cloud present day awareness. So I'm all for being present, but sometimes when we're present to a wounding from the past, as opposed to just being present because everything's great in the present. But if your body is still hanging on to wounds from the past, they do need to be excavated, ideally with gentleness and compassion and love, not necessarily, forced. Right. So a lot of the work I do really is very gentle and compassionate. And I tune in all the time to see what is this person's body, mind, spirit triune really capable of processing in this moment. If you do too much, it's overload. And overload, unfortunately, is what most of us have experienced much of our lives and what makes them reach out to me to begin with. So, in other words, be patient with the self, honor the path, open to the possibility that everything is perfect. And if you really kind of step back, the bigger question, right? How could something not be perfect if the creator created the universe and you believe the creator made mistakes? Well, sure, then there's a lot of imperfections. But I don't believe the creator makes mistakes. I think perfection creates perfection. Our minds just don't let us see that. So it really helped me realize there is a why for all of this. I know I'm sure I've said that a few times, but I think it is such an important point. And when that can be really integrated, we just tend to fight life a lot less.
Yeah, that is beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Wow. Thank you for sharing everything that you have brought forth to so much to reflect about or reflect on, I should say. So much there, Dave. Every time you're here, I just absolutely love it. And how can our audience connect with you and work with you if they'd like?
Easiest thing to do is the website, which is my name, davemarkowitz.com. All the information's on there: scheduling, workshops, private sessions, a lot of videos like this. All right, if you want some more information, although not a lot about this particular information, a lot about more specific healing practices too. And of course, the book is going to go into how do we heal these wounds. We just touched upon the introduction to them.
Mm-hmm.
That question, of course, is how do we heal them? So the book will describe that. And of course, upcoming workshops and private sessions will go into that with much more detail.
Right. And private sessions now, they can do that with you now, right? We don't
Yeah,
have to wait for the book.
right. Totally.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's phenomenal. Thank you again, Dave, for being
Of course.
here. It's such an honor.
Thank you.
And from myself and the team here at Beyond the Reiki Gateway, we'd like to say thank you to our listeners for all of your support, including leaving great reviews, becoming BTRG insiders, and sharing this show with your friends and family. Drop us a line at info@beyondthereikigateway.com anytime. Tell us what's on your mind and take great care. Until next time. Thank you again for joining me. Please check the description underneath this video to learn more, connect with us, and get some important information about your listening experience. Wishing you all the best until we meet again beyond the Reiki Gateway.